Welcome to the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Join us each week as we sit down with the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management and author of Your Fiscal Physical, Ryan Nelson. Tune in to gain valuable insights and practical tips as we simplify complex financial concepts into digestible lessons. From budgeting to retirement planning, this podcast is your go-to resource for mastering financial literacy.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Fiscal Physical Podcast. My name is Aaron Hoisington, and I am joined here by the star of the show, the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management, Ryan Nelson. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing well today. How are you doing?
I am doing pretty phenomenal, my man. I am, we are chugging through these episodes here. I really hope that everybody's getting, at least something out of these here. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, giving us your feedback, and we look forward to bringing you many more of these episodes here. And make sure if you guys have a question or anything that you want us to talk about, or just, honestly, you guys have heard some of our listener questions here. Really, anything that you have with personal finance that you want to discuss or have a question on that maybe you're been scared to ask or whatever, like send it over to us. Like we'll check it out. We'll see how it is applicable and what Obviously, this is not a financial advice podcast, but it is increasing someone's financial literacy and such too. So I think that anybody can participate in this, and we'll help you out for sure, or at least make fun of you, like nothing else. So, but this week, Ryan, we're going to talk about the Rule of 72. Last week we talked about compound interest. So,
yep.
And I'm going to be honest with you here. I don't really know what the Rule of 72 is. Like, I saw it we're going to talk about this, and I was like, well, I'm going to let Ryan tell me about this and then see how it works and what it actually is. So I'm going to turn it over to you here. And, what is this Rule of 72?
Yeah, so the Rule of 72 has to do with compounding interest.
Oh.
So the previous episode, we talked about compounding interest. And we even had some examples there where we tried to sort of conceptualize, a X amount return, like a certain rate of return. What would these account balances grow to? And it's really, really hard to conceptualize, right? At the end of the episode, we did we chatted about Warren Buffett and how his net worth has grown exponentially, right? And it's just really, really hard if you or I was to try to think about, okay, I think last week we said his net worth was at 140 billion, give or take. What's his net worth going to be 5 years from now?
Oh man,
10 years from now. It's really hard to conceptualize and think like, oh, does it double? Wait, no, does it go up by 40 billion? I mean,
right.
Like what? It's just really hard, right? So if I was to ask you, hey, if you have $100,000 and it grows, let's say that, let's do a quick example here.
Sure.
Let's say we had $100,000 and it grew by 7.2% for 30 years.
Okay.
What would the balance be?
100 grand is what I started out with?
Yeah, 7.2%. Over 30 years.
Over 30 years. So I'm guessing it's quite a large number because...
Good start.
Yeah, I'm in the ballpark here for sure. So I'm going to go with, let's go with $13 million.
Okay. So it's just good guess.
Thank you.
So it's just really hard to think about and conceptualize, right? So I'm going to walk you through sort of a mental trick that we can do this in our head, this math in our heads, and get a really, really, really close answer to what it would actually be. Because the math itself is actually fairly complicated. It's hard even to do on like a lot of basic calculators. And it's semi-complex. But there's some rough estimates of what we can do that could get us incredibly close.
Cool. I love it.
So what we use is what we call the Rule of 72. And what we do is we take 72 and divide it by the rate of return. So I said our rate of return was 7.2%. Conveniently, 72 divided by 7.2 is 10.
Nice.
Right?
Now we're talking.
What this tells us is our portfolio doubles every 10 years. So at 7.2%, our portfolio doubles every 10 years. So now what we can say is, okay, we started at 100,000. I think I said for 30 years.
Yes. Yeah.
So 100,000 is doubling every 10 years. So at the end of 10 years, it's going to be 200,000. At the end of 20 years, it's going to double again. It's another 10 years. So it goes from 200,000 to 400,000. And then at another 10 years, so at the end of 30 years, it'll go for double again. So from 400,000 to 800,000. So now we can have quite a bit of confidence if we have $100,000 growing at 7.2% rate of return for 30 years, it's going to be approximately $800,000. And so just like that, you can do this math pretty, relatively easy in your head, come to very, very close approximations of what the actual amount will be. So roughly $100,000 invested, compounding, with compound interest at 7.2% for 30 years, you're going to be at $800,000.
Nice.
And so that's the value of this tool, is it lets us do simple math to calculate rate of returns. And so the nice thing about the rule of 72 is that the math works out really well for sort of these rates of return that are relevant for market returns. So it's most accurate around that, it's going to be most accurate around 7, 8, 9, 10% returns. 7, 8, 9% is going to be the most accurate. The further you get away from that, so at 1% or at 25% returns, you could still use this tool. It's just going to be a little less accurate.
Sure.
But right there at 7, 8, 9%, it's going to be really accurate. And the math works out really cleanly, where if I told you had a 6% interest rate, cool, it's doubling every 12 years. 6 times 12 is 72.
Right.
If you're getting a 7.2% rate of return,
sure,
it's doubling every 10 years. If you're getting an 8% rate of return, it's doubling every 9 years. If you get a 9% rate of return, it's doubling every 8 years. If you get a 10% rate of return, it's doubling every 7.2 years, right? And so those are some of the numbers we'd be kind of the order of magnitude we'd be talking about for rates of return. And so the rule of 72 works out perfectly, where it makes the math simple for these numbers,
definitely, yeah,
and is extremely accurate. So it sort of in a nutshell, it's just a mathematical tool or concept that we can use to take advantage of when we're doing kind of basic math for ourselves. We can get pretty darn close approximations without having to use a calculator or go to our computer. It just helps us conceptualize some of this stuff.
That's awesome, man. And it really breaks it down, because most people can do that math. That's very, very simple, and get you a pretty good as. Do you happen to know where that came from? I don't know if I just thought of that in my head.
I mean, it really is a mathematical principle,
right?
So I'm sure probably a few different. I have no idea maybe who the first person to discover it or think of it was. My guess would be on mathematical principles like this. Oftentimes, I feel like it's multiple people converging on one answer.
Sure.
So probably multiple people figured this trick out at different times. That would be my guess. But no, I do not know.
No, I was just curious. And then as far as once again, just thinking of this as we're having this conversation, as far as is 7.2 or 7%, is that over the last, I don't know if you know, over the last 20 years, is that a pretty standard rate of return? Obviously it's going to vary.
It really does all depend on how you're invested. So, if you're invested in 90% stock, 10% bonds, you're going to have a different rate of return than if you're in 10% stock, 90% bonds. So it really is dependent on how you're invested. I think and it's so dependent. I'll see people cherry pick different time periods.
Sure.
So they'll say, oh, well, over the last 35 years or over the last 50 years or over the last 20 years. And you could go cherry pick different time periods and then say oh, well, the market gets X return. Look, here's the historical data over the last 35 years that shows that. Or here's the historical data over the last 100 years that shows that, right? And so it really is hard to say, is what's a better representation of what might happen in the future? 100-year period? Or would you say, no, what happened 80, 90, 100 years ago is irrelevant to today's markets? You should only be looking at a 70-year period. Right. Or would you say even what happened 70 years is irrelevant? Or if you only look at a 20-year window, would you say that's not a long enough time period? You got to look at least 50 years, right?
Right.
So there's lots of different arguments there. I mean, you can hear people out there saying, oh, the market gets 12% returns. Well, if you're talking about just the U.S. stock market over a very set time period, yeah, you can find periods of time where the U.S. stock market's averaged 12% returns. You can also find periods of time where the U.S. stock market averaged 10% returns. I think oftentimes, if you just go Google how much you should use as you're planning, a lot of what I see on the internet will say think about 7% rate of returns. If you're in a portfolio that has primarily stock and some bond exposure, lots of people might use 7% rate of return. I would tell you that's still not an exact enough of a science. Like if you're actually like working with a professional, what we would be doing is figuring out what your asset allocation is, how much risk you're taking,
right,
and then really using an approximate rate of return based on like your exact asset allocation. But for just doing back of napkin math, yeah, getting 7.2%, that might be reasonable depending on how you're investing your portfolio.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, that's great. I really appreciate how you're able to break that down. And you guys can't see this because I'm just talking and this isn't live, but I wrote this down as well, too. And I'm like, I can't wait to go home and show my wife and be like, hey, check this out. And look at what the difference is. I'm between like, what if we got a 10% rate versus like a 7%? How much quicker would this double at that point too? So that's fun to think about.
And vice versa, right? Like, so if you're looking at a mortgage and you're getting a 3% interest rate versus an 8% interest rate, you can see exactly the opposite effect. You'd pay a lot more for 8% than you would for 3%.
Yep. Absolutely. That's a great digestible way to look at it as well, too. So awesome, Ryan. Well, I appreciate it, man. We'll go ahead and pause here. We'll be back on the other side of this. So everybody hang tight.
Awesome.
And now to put the personal in personal finance.
Welcome, everybody, to the personal section of this episode of the Fiscal Physical podcast. I'm here with Ryan Nelson, and we're gonna slow it down a little bit here and talk about something that I'm sure everybody likes to do here. But I'm curious what you like to do with this, Ryan. How do you're a pretty go guy. You like to stay busy, which is awesome. But what do you have anything specifically that you do to unwind or relax, like after a long day or whatever? Like what do you kind of use to unwind or relax?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have any great tools for unwinding or relaxing. I mean, I think just having like regular exercise habits, so swimming, running, biking, lifting, helps almost, maybe, I don't know, it helps maybe alleviate the need to like unwind or relax. Like I don't get usually home from the end of the day and just say, gosh, I'm like exhausted. I got to put my feet up,
Sure. Yeah.
My job is while it can be mentally strenuous at times, it's not very physically demanding. Right. And then I try to get, do some sort of exercise to just really maintain a healthy life and try to get, I'm pretty good about getting a healthy amount of sleep. And I think probably between sleep and exercise, I think overall I'm able to keep a fairly well-balanced life. Yeah, that's what I would say. What about you?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point that you kind of make there, because I'm also I like a 3-step process when I'm like, all right, I'm need to unwind, I need to relax as far as this goes. And number one is do some sort of physical exercise. Even if it's just take a walk. Yeah. Like just go out and check your mail, go down the street, whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
And then I love to come in. I love to eat a nice meal. Whatever that might be. For some reason, food brings me comfort. I mean, absolutely, most people as well, too. But just something, not something super heavy, but a nice, healthy, good meal. Yeah. And then you hit on it as well. Get sleep. Yeah. Sleep is so crucial just in general. Like, and having a regular, sleep schedule or bedtime, whatever it might be. Not only if you guys have kids out there, but it's just as far as a human goes. I think about when I was younger, my sleep schedule was so varied. Like I was just like, oh man, like on the weekends I wasn't getting any sleep. Right. And then during the week I was like, well, I'm really tired. I'm going to bed at 7:00 tonight too. So just those 3 things when I'm like, oh man, I need to unwind, because I'm saying with you, my job's not physically demanding, but mentally, I come home and I'm like, okay, I gotta think about something else. And just being able to take a walk, have a nice meal, and get some sleep is just the trifecta as far as I'm concerned there. So
that sounds fair to me.
Yeah, I like it for sure. So pose it back to the listeners. What do you guys do to unwind or relax? Hopefully you're out there thinking about the rule of 72, because that'll really get you going for sure.
If nothing else, it'll put you to sleep. So.
Yes, it will for sure. So awesome. Well, actually, I really hope you guys are unwinding by listening to the Fiscal Physical podcast is what I'd really like, because hopefully our melodic tones are bringing you guys comfort for sure. So I'm really excited about this episode. And appreciate everyone who's tuning in, listening. Reminder, all our episodes drop on Tuesday mornings. That's when they go live. So check us out, rate, subscribe, send that feedback. And Ryan, you got anything left to wrap us up with?
As always, stay the course.
Thank you for joining us for the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Until next time, happy listening, and as always, stay the course. If you have a question or topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com. If you enjoyed today's discussion, subscribe to the podcast to ensure you never miss an episode, and consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite platform. This helps other listeners like you find the show. For more resources, you can visit Alchemy Wealth Management's website at www.alchemywealth.com or find your Fiscal Physical, the book, on Amazon. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that personal finance is just that, personal. Please don't take anything we say as advice. The preceding content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not an offer or a solicitation, nor should it be construed or relied upon for tax, legal, or investment advice. It doesn't consider your personal financial situation or objectives and may not be suitable for you.